Welcome to Contemporary First Nation Voices. This is NBE 3C, grade 11 English, college level, and this is Jillian Percy. This is class number 24, and today we are going to be working on key question number 37. Here are all the ways to contact us. You can call the studio while I'm on at 1-800-465-7144. You can also call me at the office, 1-800-667-3703, extension 2211. There is a fax number, 1-800-463-7852. You can also send me an email, jillian.percy@nnec.on.ca. You can also reach out to me on Facebook, capital G, capital P, ERCY, space, capital W, AHSA. If you're looking for me on Facebook, I will look like this. I've got kind of a little fall scene and then a little avatar in a dark black dress here. When you are doing that, if you make a friend request, please also tell me who you are with like your correct legal name, right? Because obviously G. Percy Wassa isn't my actual name. I'm sure you don't use your real name for your Facebook either, but then I don't know for sure who you are. And tell me what class you're in, right? I know right now I'm talking to NBE 3C people, but some people take more than one of my classes. So if you've got questions about one class, just kind of let me know which one it is. All right. Two different YouTube channels. The first one is my teacher one, which has the same name as my Facebook, so G. Percy Wassa as well. That has all the videos that I've posted so far. They'll be linked under the playlist tab. It'll say like 2025 MBE3C. If you click on that, should list them right in order. If you find that something is missing, kind of give me a little shout out and let me know, and I'll post. Occasionally I get a little bit behind on that. And then there's a school channel, which is called Wassa Distance Education YouTube channel. So if you're taking more than one course from us, that's really great. It only has courses from this year, but it has every course that teachers have taught from this year. And again, same thing, I'll just look for a playlist, okay? So how to hand in work, that's probably my most commonly asked question. There are a whole bunch of different ways you can hand in assignments. If you have a learning center in your community, the easiest way is give it to the DEC, ask them to scan it in and send it to me. When you do that, hang on to your originals. Several courses, including, I believe this one, has a portfolio at the very end. You can also fax it to me, 1-800-463-7852. That's if you're in Ontario. If you are in another province besides Ontario, 1-877-990-2023. If you do send me fax, try not to use pencil because it comes up very light for some reason. Typing or pen are much better for faxing. You can also scan it yourself using a scanner app on your phone and then send it to me. That's a great way to do it if you feel like you have to take a photograph because it produces really crisp, clear documents. You can mail it to me, but it's not the way I would recommend. If you do this, be sure to hang on to the originals and only send me your copies. It takes several weeks to get here, and then I still kind of have a little bit of a 2-week delay right now for marking. So it can make a really long time before you hear back from me. It can be frustrating. If you use Google Docs to do your assignments, you can share documents with me that way. Remember to include me as someone who's able to view or edit. Sometimes people forget to do that, and then it's just a link and I'm not allowed to see anything. You can use photographs. This is not my preferred way. It is much trickier on my end, even though I know it's a little bit simpler on your end. If you are doing photographs, please make sure it's really clear and not blurry. It should preferably be written in pen or typed so it's dark enough for me to read on the photograph. Your photo should be taken with the phone parallel to the assignment. You don't want to have it at an angle because what will happen is this part that's closest to the phone I can read, but the part that's farthest away will be kind of distorted and it'll be very hard for me to read. Don't just click the share button. That only works if I'm on a phone, and I'm not on a phone, I'm on a computer. It'll come up at a very odd size and it'll be hard to see. Also, don't cut and paste it into the body of an email. Instead, save it as a file and attach it as an email. One other option is some people will stick the photo in on a WordPerfect page. If you do that, don't make it small because I can't expand it enough to read it. Make sure it's the same size as the page or as close as possible. Otherwise, it's just going to be, it'll become blurry if I try and enlarge it is what happens. Whenever you hand in work, always send it to studentwork@nnec.on.ca. You can CC me in the email if you want to be doubly safe. When you do this, the secretary can log that you submitted the work. It goes into our database. There's a record that you submitted it in case it gets forgotten or if I got sick or whatever can happen. Things occur, right? Please always include your full name, the course name, the assignment number, and the name right physically on the assignment, not just in the email. That way I know for sure. I can have easily 20 to 40 assignments put on my desk at one time. It's easy for things to get mixed up with someone else's, so please make sure that every assignment has that on it. If an assignment asks for rough and a good draft, please label which one is which and always include them both in the same email. I always compare them to see what kind of progress you made and what kind of changes you made. All right, so this is a nice little poster. I did not create this poster. This is from Adobe. There's an Adobe Scan app that is really easy to use. I've got it on my phone. I use it for like tax documents and stuff like that. It's free. Um, I'm sure that most scanners work very similarly, but this one will obviously work best for Adobe Scan. Obviously, install it first, then open it. Once you've got it, make sure your assignment is flat, and you want to make sure there's no shadows on it or no glaring light spots that will kind of like wipe things out. Try and hold your phone in such a way that that doesn't cast a shadow on it. And you can see here, they've got it at a little bit more of an angle than it really should be. That's because they're trying to show you both things at once. You can play with the edges a little bit so you don't have the table, it's just the document. If there's more than one page of the document, just keep on doing those pictures over and over again until you've got all the pages. Tap continue when you're done. Now you can look through everything, make sure nothing's blurry, make sure it's in the right order. Tap save the PDF and give it a name. Obviously something like, A13 for NBE 3C. Then you can save it wherever you'd save it, Google Drive, Dropbox, your phone. Write me an email and send it along. Now, I know this probably looks really similar to taking a photograph, but what I find is most photographs are looking at visuals. They're not as detailed as writing tends to be. The scanner apps will produce a much better version of your assignment that is really, really readable. So that's why I'm really encouraging you to use the scanner. It will also send me like a PDF document, which is again, easier for me to open than say 20 JPEGs. Okay. So my apologies, I was sick last week. So we have skipped over week 7 and have kind of launched right into week 8. Today, we should only be getting on to assignment 37, as far as I can tell. This is always a rough estimate. This is my first time teaching this course, and I'm not always sure how long it's going to take me to talk about different things. I say this every week just because I never know if everyone's watching every single one, but some assignments have been added, changed, or eliminated from the originals that you may have got at the beginning of the year. The numbers I am showing for an assignment may not quite match your original. You're welcome to hand in either the original or the revised version until the end of this school year, like June. If you are taking this course next year, September 2025 and on, do not continue using the original. Make sure you get the revised version. The revised version is better. It's usually more understandable. It will cover more criteria, and I try really hard to make it make a lot of sense. We are almost finished Unit 3, which is all about truth and reconciliation. We're on lesson 14. Now, I did not write this course originally. This is a course I received from somebody else. And one of the dangers when we do our courses is we do try and include video links to current material that's not always available in like a textbook. The problem is sometimes those links go dead. And so the next 2 lessons that were supposed to happen in Unit 3, I have had to significantly change from the beginning of the year because the link for the movie that we were supposed to watch called Muffins for Granny is no longer working. And I have kind of trolled around all the different sites and tried to see if I can find another free source, but I cannot find one. Now, some of our learning centers or our partner schools like PFC or DFC probably still have copies of the movie DVD, which if you are out of school, you probably have the appropriate technology to watch, in which case you are welcome to do the original assignments for lesson 14, lesson 15. But I don't have copies of the DVD, and like I said, the web link no longer works. I tried YouTube, I tried all sorts of places, I just can't make it work. So if you are watching this teaching video and it is again later than September 2025, you must do the new assignments. That is what I'll be expecting next year. This year, you've got some choices. So we are going to be talking about Indigenous cinema. I'm just trying to make sure I'm using stuff that everybody is able to access. So our goal for today will be that students are able to recognize important moments in Canadian Indigenous film history and understand the different genres in cinema. Students will also make a video journal to discuss the challenges facing Indigenous people in the film industry. All right, introduction. In this lesson, you're going to explore different examples of Indigenous media with a particular focus on Indigenous film and cinema. The ways that Indigenous peoples have been depicted in films, such as Westerns, have often been rooted in colonial and racist stereotypes. Indigenous filmmakers strive to use cinema to tell stories and create representations that are more authentic and reflective of the realities of Indigenous peoples, communities, and individuals. So first of all, what do we mean by media? Before we talk about film and cinema specifically, we want to have a general understanding of what people mean when they refer to the media. First of all, media is a word that simply refers to different ways of communicating, often with larger groups of people, usually through some sort of technology. Media can include things like audio, like radio, visual mediums, print mediums, and electronic forms of communication. Students sometimes think of media as only relating to text that you've accessed through a computer, but it's really a much broader term than that. If you're only referring to one specific type of communicating, we use the singular form of the word, which is medium. For example, radio is a medium of communication. Medium is kind of like a method or a material or a way. If you're talking about two or more different forms of communicating, then we use the plural form of the word, which is media. So for example, radio and television are media of communication. It's a strange way to make a plural, but I believe that's, I can't remember, I think it's Greek, not Latin, and they do their plurals a little bit differently than we do. Now, sometimes media are referred to as mass media, which is when you're doing communication with a very large audience, like an entire country. Forms like that would be like television, radio, major newspapers, mass market paperback books, and on the internet. However, media that's aimed at smaller audiences, like a community newspaper like the Sioux Bulletin, right? People outside of Sioux Lookout probably aren't reading the Sioux Bulletin. Community radio, cable TV shows, those aren't considered mass media. They are media, but they're not mass media. A media text can be anything that appears in any type of media. So television commercials, programs, films, video games, apps, magazines, interviews, brochures, web pages, blogs, social media stuff like Facebook, Twitter, or X, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat. All of those are different types of media texts, okay? Even items of clothing that display slogans or brand names could be considered a type of media text because there's still a kind of a reading involved in that. In this unit, we're going to really focus about Canadian Indigenous film history and important milestones. We have kind of dealt with other types of media in other parts of this course. Okay, so the beginnings of cinema. This is an extremely short version of cinema. Whole textbooks have been written about it. We can't possibly cover it all, but I just kind of want to make sure we have some similar awareness of what the history is. So both film and cinema have their roots in earlier art forms, things like oral storytelling, visual arts, theater, shadow puppets, camera obscura, which is like the pinhole cameras, and magic lanterns. No single individual is responsible for inventing cinema. But in 1891, the Edison Company developed a prototype of the kinetoscope, which allowed someone to first view moving pictures. And then in Paris in 1895, the Lumiere brothers were the first to present moving pictures to a paying audience using what they called a cinematograph, which was a combination of a camera, a projector, and a film printer. Throughout the early 20th century, many advancements were made in film technology. In 1908, the very first movie to use color was a French film called A Trip to the Moon, which was only 8 minutes long and was hand colored. Like, in other words, somebody was painting that. And then a film called The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, was the first movie that was originally shot with color film right from the start. Now, that doesn't mean that everything was color, and it doesn't mean that every film after that was color. Many films continued to be shot in black and white with small scenes or different images that were in color. Later, in 1927, a movie called The Jazz Singer was the first one to introduce sound to movies. So there was color before we had sound. But it was not really until The Wizard of Oz, which was released in 1939, that color became kind of a more standard feature of film. Before that, it was a little bit more experimental, and there was a lot more black and white film. During the 1930s and the 1940s, cinema was a hugely popular form of entertainment. In the last few decades, the film industry has changed due to the impact of digital technology. Today, most mainstream films are made using digital formats and editing, and special effects are added using computer technology. So I am actually old enough that I took film in university, and it was literally a physical piece of plastic film. And if you wanted to do film editing, you literally got out like a little tiny knife and you cut the film and you taped it to the other side and you did your film editing that way, which I know sounds absolutely insane these days with digital stuff, but that is how it was done in the old days. Here is some pictures of the trip to the moon, which you can see there were some black and white images and there were some colored stuff. And you can see it's kind of either painted or dyed and not super detailed. It just kind of gave a little bit of color there. And then this is an ad for the Jazz Singer. This is the first one that includes sound. I do want to give you a heads up if you take a look at this. They do use blackface in this, which is a bit disconcerting if you've never seen that before. And then Wizard of Oz, I'm assuming most people have seen that, but if you haven't, it's a film that begins in black and white, and it's trying to show how dreary Kansas is to the little girl called Dorothy. And then when she enters into kind of this dream or magical world of Oz, everything becomes color. And it was really, it wasn't the first color, but it was revolutionary. After that, it became far more common for people to begin to use color because it was just such a huge step, basically. Okay, so the first Canadian, this is a fictional film. In Canada, the film industry always competes with American Hollywood for both audiences and talent. Nevertheless, Canadians have also made films since the late 1890s. The Canadian Pacific Railway Company funded films starting in 1902 to encourage British immigration to Canada. So those would have been kind of like advertisements or like propaganda films where the railroad wanted people to come from Britain over to Canada. I'm assuming either they wanted workers for their company or they wanted customers who would be using the train, basically. But the first fictional drama made in Canada was a 15-minute movie called Hiawatha, the Messiah of the Ojibwe, which was made in 1903. Most other films at this time rarely went longer than 3 minutes. This was a huge step forward. And this film was based on an 1855 poem called The Song of Hiawatha by, no, it says Henry Wadsworth. I thought it was oh, I think that's Longfellow as well there. Okay, here's actually a beautiful little still from the movie. And then I was kind of hunting around to see if it was actually still visible. And it's really blurry here, but there is actually a YouTube link. I don't know if it's the entire film, but it's pretty close. It's about 14 minutes. This was also the very first film in North America to star an entirely Native American cast, which I think is really cool. Now, be aware, because of the time frame, I am absolutely sure there will be some stereotypes that you may find a little bit upsetting. But it's kind of amazing to me that that far back, there was already Native American filmography going on. So kind of cool. I wish I could watch it with you guys, but unfortunately I really can't. There is also a link to the original poem if you want to read it. Again, Longfellow was not Indigenous, but it is a really interesting and very famous poem. Okay. So moving on to talk about film genres. A film genre is just a category of film that is based upon different narrative and stylistic criteria. They're very similar to book genres. And genres are just a useful way to categorize different styles of stories and content. So if you're browsing on a media site like Netflix, for example, you'll notice that films and television shows are often sorted into different genres to help people locate the types of film that they're most interested in watching, right? Like in my household, my husband's probably going to be watching a lot of the news. He's very into politics, right? I might be watching comedy or drama. Um, if we have younger people over, they might be watching animation or cartoons. Those kind of genres have their own characteristics, right? They may have different types of plots that are typical, or settings, or characters, or themes that are pretty much typically used in that category. So a science fiction film, for example, is going to have very different elements than, say, a historical drama. And generally when people are watching a certain drama, they kind of are, they know what to expect. That's why they're watching that type. It's also important to remember that genres do change and evolve over time. Certain plots may become outdated, or stereotypes that were once considered acceptable become abandoned and taboo. In addition, there are always new subgenres that emerge over time as writers, directors, and producers experiment with mixing and adapting their styles, usually in response to audience feedback or box office success. So, just like non-Indigenous people, Indigenous filmmakers have covered a huge variety of subjects and topics in their work. They have created feature films, documentaries, art films, and shorts using many different genres. Below, we're just going to talk about some explanations of common genres. So, comedy. Comedy films are funny and entertaining, usually putting characters in a challenging, amusing, absurd, or humorous situation. Comedies are not necessarily just about making jokes. Often, the very premise of the film leads to a humorous situation. Action. Action movies are fast paced and include elements such as fight scenes, chase scenes, and slow motion shots. They might feature superheroes, martial arts, or exciting stunts. Action movies are meant to be thrilling to watch and leave the audience members on the edge of their seats. Drama. Films in the drama genre generally include stories with high stakes and a lot of conflicts. These movies are usually driven by the plot, and each scene in the movie moves the plot forward. Characters in dramas are motivated by their own desires and emotions. So this is not usually superhero type stuff. This is usually slightly more serious stuff. Westerns. Westerns usually tell stories featuring a cowboy or a gunslinger pursuing some sort of outlaw in the Wild West. The protagonist is often seeking revenge and will face off with the criminal in a duel or a shootout at the end. Westerns will very often feature stereotypical representations of Indigenous people, communities, and cultures. Now, this is a genre that really had gone out of fashion completely for a really long time. With that TV series Yellowstone, there's kind of been a renewed interest in Westerns. So this may not necessarily be true of kind of the newer style Westerns. Horror. Horror films are intended to leave audiences with an overwhelming sense of fear and dread. Horror movies often feature serial killers or monsters or some sort of supernatural thing as evil antagonists to play on viewers' fears or nightmares. Mysteries. Mystery films are usually about crimes and a detective who tries to solve the crime. They may be amateurs, or like Miss Marple, for example, or they may be private detectives, or they may be professional detectives. Mysteries are usually very suspenseful, where the protagonist is gathering clues and evidence to discover the truth. Often the movie is like a puzzle that the audience can try to solve along with the protagonist. A very common subgenre of mysteries are police procedurals, for example, which focus solely on crime investigation done by police or other official law enforcement personnel such as RCMP. Hang on. Okay, romance. Romance films are love stories. They are usually about two characters exploring different aspects of love and relationships, including sacrifice, marriage, obsession, or rejection. Romance movies sometimes include hardships like illness, infidelity, tragedy, or other obstacles that the characters need to overcome. A really common subgenre here is the romantic comedy, which combines the romance story with lots of comic elements. Those are really common when you're having two people meeting for the first time. Okay. Science fiction. Science fiction films are usually set in the future and deal with the consequences of technological and scientific advances. They explore a really wide range of themes and ideas, including things like time travel, space travel, life on other planets, and alternate realities. Dystopia stories are one type of subgenre which focus on future or imaginary societies where there's a lot of injustice or hardship due to totalitarian governments or post-apocalyptic disasters. So totalitarian governments are like dictatorships where there's very strict rules. It's not democratic. You don't get to vote. You don't really get a say in things. Post-apocalyptic means that there's been some gigantic catastrophe like nuclear war or worldwide famine or something. And it's kind of like the remnants of human society after something has kind of destroyed most of the government and the people and that kind of thing. Short films. Short films are films that are not long enough to be considered a feature film. So these are generally 40 minutes or shorter. Shorts can come in a variety of genres, and they're very often experimental. Because they're so short, they can become a much cheaper way to explore new technology or a method of filmmaking that might be expensive or unsuccessful in a longer or larger film. Documentary. Documentaries are nonfiction films that are intended to document or record some aspect of real life. These films are generally informative and are often used in educational settings such as schools. They can be on any subject, but you will see a lot that are focused on animals or their environment or events in history or tell the biographies of famous people. All right, Indigenous cinema. I don't know why this is very small for some reason. Hang on a second. All right, in Canada, sorry, there we go. In Canada and the United States, colonial attitudes have long influenced the representation of Indigenous people in films. In other words, how they are portrayed. Non-Indigenous filmmakers often misrepresented Indigenous stories and cultures on screen and perpetuated harmful stereotypes. Westerns, especially, often had very negative depictions of Indigenous peoples and would only sometimes cast Indigenous people to play Indigenous roles. So you know how we were talking about that other film, The Jazz Singer, how they used what was called blackface, where they took a white person, put black makeup on their face, and usually a very weird, exaggerated kind of mouth, because not a lot of Black people at that point were sort of allowed to be actors. They kind of did the same thing here with Indigenous people. It's sometimes referred to as brown face. So one of the interesting things about that first film that we were talking about was that film, even though that was over 100 years ago, was literally the very first film that was entirely Native American people, which is really, really unusual. So the 1990 film Dances with Wolves was enormously popular, won 7 Academy Awards, but it has been critiqued as perpetuating that kind of white savior stereotype. Even though the film employed Indigenous actors and included the use of the Lakota language, it still focused on the story of a white man saving Indigenous peoples. Similarly, Disney's 1995 animated film Pocahontas has been criticized both for its historical inaccuracies and harmful depictions of Indigenous women. This concept of a white savior is considered a cinematic trope or a cliche, in which a white character is the rescuer of non-white characters from difficult circumstances. It kind of often implies that the non-white characters couldn't have solved the difficulties on their own without the aid of the white savior. So that was a very common sort of theme or message for a long time, and they're really trying to move away from that very common theme to ones that are more empowering and show Indigenous people as capable and strong and successful. So this is a very stereotypical summary. This is Lisa Tatanati, a professor at Kansas State University. She offers a description of how Indigenous people are usually portrayed in mainstream non-Indigenous cinema and television in North America. I would say I don't know if I know that this is still true, but it definitely was true for a very long time. She says, it goes something like this. Front stage, America is discovered. Backstage, Indians dispossessed of land and voice are pushed to the outskirts and relegated to the back walls of their own countries. Front stage left, it's the last of the Mohicans, and Natty Bumppo is sad, sad, sad. Front stage right, the Indians dance, quote, wild and crazy. Cue the cavalry, swell the violin strings. Center stage, the Indians die. As the credits roll, a voiceover in broken English. The nation's hoop is broken and scattered. There is no center any longer, and the sacred tree is dead. And the last words that Black Elk never spoke erroneously become this single version of Native history in which all Native pasts are subsumed. Pretty soon, the whole darn thing is the only film on the all-day History Channel movie marathon. So she's talking about a few things. So that A, what's being portrayed is what's happening mostly with white people in America and Canada as well. And what's really going on with the First Nations people is happening in the background. It's not being portrayed. And when it is, it's very stereotypical. The thing she's talking about here, where she's talking about people dying, is there was a lot of portrayal as if somehow all First Nations people had sort of disappeared or died off, and is a very strange kind of thing that happened for a while. I don't quite understand it. The other thing she's talking about here is the idea that every tribe sort of had the same history, which is really not true. Both America and Canada are huge countries that had a really wide variety of tribes who had all sorts of different histories and different types of contact with Europeans and all sorts of things that happen to them. They aren't all the same, right? And certainly it doesn't end with everybody dying off the way it's kind of portrayed in a lot of movies in the past. Today, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis filmmakers are creating their own films to tell stories that highlight the strength and resilience of their communities on their own terms. Indigenous films share critical perspectives, cultures, and languages with the world while challenging stereotypes. They are also building on the work of previous generations of Indigenous filmmakers. In the 1960s, the National Film Board of Canada funded the creation of Indigenous films by establishing a First Nations film crew and producing their films. In 1968, the Mi'kmaq filmmaker and folk singer Willie Dunn directed The Ballad of Crowfoot, the first film released by the crew. So you can see it's kind of interesting here because they're talking about the 1960s. I wonder when it actually got established, because it's almost 8 years before there's actually a film from that. So this film featured the lyrics and music of Dunn alongside archival photos, etchings, videos, and a contemporary newspaper clipping. In 1969, the first film made by a First Nations film crew, These Are My People, was released. It was a documentary about the history of Indigenous and settler relationships that gave a First Nations perspective on topics such as the Longhouse religion, culture, government, and the impacts of colonialism. Milestones. Another key moment in Indigenous cinema was the release of the film Smoke Signals in 1998. This movie was an adaptation of the work of Sherman Alexie, and it challenged Western representations of Indigenous people, often with humor. Smoke Signals not only offered accurate representations of Indigenous peoples in a mainstream film, it was also significant because Indigenous artists had creative control throughout the writing, filming, and production processes. And then the 2001 film, Atanarajak, The Fast Runner, was the first feature film made entirely in the Inuktitut language. Filmed on location in Igloolik, Nunavut, It tells the story of a Tanadric who has been passed down over centuries through the oral tradition. Directed by Inuk director Zacharias Canuck, this is the only Canadian film to win the Camera d'Or for Best Feature Film at the Cannes Film Festival. Wow, the only Canadian film. It was named the best Canadian film of all time in a 2015 Toronto International Film Festival poll of filmmakers and critics. This film had a major impact on Canadian and Inuit filmmaking. I believe that's still out there. I believe you can still find copies of that. All right, contemporary cinema. Today, Indigenous peoples continue to create and tell stories using cinema and television. Beginning in the 1980s, the availability and affordability of camcorders led to a rise in Indigenous film and video production around the world. This has continued with the wide availability of digital cameras and video recording devices, including, say, your phone. Around the world, there are many film festivals devoted to highlighting Indigenous productions, and in several countries, there are television channels dedicated to Indigenous programming, such as the National Indigenous Television in Australia, Maori Television in New Zealand, and the Aboriginal Peoples Television Network in Canada. Global Indigenous film. Worldwide, Indigenous filmmakers have enjoyed creative and commercial success at the highest level. For example, the Maori actor and director Taika Waititi has written and directed several films, including Boy, What We Do in the Shadows, and Thor Ragnarok. Thor Ragnarok was filmed in Australia, and for Waititi, it was important to have an opening ceremony that included local Indigenous peoples to ensure that the filming was done in a good way. He also worked to ensure that Indigenous peoples were employed in various roles on the set, and he gave opportunities for other aspiring Indigenous filmmakers to observe the process. Okay, so here's just kind of a little list of different sources of Indigenous cinema in case you want to see some. Obviously, most people in Canada would know about the APTN, but some of them you might not have known because they're from other countries, basically. Oh, I forgot to change this. This is support question number 13. This is not for marks, it's just kind of to help you sort of process what we were just reading about. What was the first Canadian fictional film and what was important about it? What is a film genre? Identify 3 genres and give examples of films and television shows that could fit within those genres. So for example, we talked about Westerns and how that TV series Yellowstone would be one example of a Western. A lot of people watched Game of Thrones. That would be an example of a fantasy. What is the white savior trope? Give an example of a movie, a television show, or book that uses this trope. We read about one. It's pretty common in a lot of things, not just with First Nations people, but also with Black Americans as well. And then number 4, give 2 reasons why the film Smoke Signals was a key moment in the history of Indigenous cinema on North America. Okay, where are we? Oh, we're not there yet, sorry. That's weird. Sorry, I don't know why that's shown up twice. I'm just going to get rid of that. Sorry, friends. Sometimes things get accidentally duplicated. Okay, so key question number 37 is going to be about a video journal. First of all, you're going to watch this following YouTube video, which is called Influential Filmmakers React to the State of Indigenous Film in Canada at this link. Now, I am not allowed to watch it, but I'm showing you a picture so that you know what you would be looking for. Ideally, I would sit here and watch it with you and we would kind of talk about it, but again, YouTube is being super difficult right now, so I'm not allowed to do that. Once you've looked at that, there is a list of questions on the next slide. Look at those questions and think about the issues that are raised. What are your opinions on these issues? How can you support your opinions with examples from your own experience and your knowledge of the world or your ideas for some solutions? And then finally, you're going to create a 4 to 5 minute audio visual reflective journal entry on your thoughts on the issues facing Indigenous filmmakers. Your journal will be graded according to the rubric on the next page, which is not here, sorry, in the page in your book. And you can use some or all of the following questions as prompts. Now, this can easily be done with your phone or with a friend's phone. If you've got a computer that has a camera on it, you can just sit and film it right there. If you're really having problem with it, please give me a phone call or email message and I can try and work something out so we can find a way for you to be able to do this, okay? Now, here are some of the prompts that they want you to think about. Lisa Jackson says, Indigenous films need to be made by Indigenous people. Why does she say this? Do you agree with her? Why or why not? Next, what are some of the barriers or obstacles facing Indigenous filmmakers? In your opinion, how could some of these barriers be addressed? And then finally, Duncan McHugh suggests that Indigenous filmmakers not only have to entertain people, but they also have to be political and educate Canadians. Do you agree with this suggestion? Why or why not? And give reasons for your answer. Now, if you think about 4 or 5 minutes, that's quite a bit of talking. So generally for me, for example, if I am looking at a slide like this, it is generally taking me about a minute or so to read a slide like that. So I would need about 4 or 5 slides with a fair bit of text before I had enough to fill up 4 or 5 minutes. So you won't be able to just kind of like wing this. You're going to need to kind of think about it a little bit and probably write out what you want to say. Not necessarily word for word, but you need to plan it out ahead of time, okay? So the idea of doing a video journal, recording your thoughts may sound really easy or really hard, depending on your comfort level. Like some people love to talk and sharing their ideas through speaking sounds easy and they are like, whew, way easier than writing. However, not everybody's outgoing. Some people feel very shy and very quiet and may not feel very comfortable doing this. But I promise you, everyone is capable of doing a video journal in some fashion, okay? One thing to try if you're feeling very nervous about it is get a friend to help you. And they can act as the interviewer and they could ask you the journal prompts to help you get started. When you're doing this, then you're kind of talking to a real person, which may seem a little easier than just talking to a camera. It also gives you the opportunity to look at your friend, like to take a picture from the side, instead of just looking directly at the camera in case the camera itself is what's making you nervous. Okay. Again, write down your ideas. Most people, including myself, do not just spontaneously create awesome sounding ideas at the top of their head while being filmed. For example, I love to teach, but if someone just like asked me a question and started shooting a film right away, I would absolutely go blank. I just wouldn't be able to think. I need time ahead of time to think about what I want to say. It doesn't need to be a word for word full script the way I'm doing. I just like that. It could just be some jot notes or some key points you want to make, along with some possible examples or details that might support your ideas. So I won't be asking you to hand in what you've written, okay? But if you're going to be talking for 5 minutes, you're probably going to want to have some sort of written notes to be able to fill that much time. It is up to you whether you choose one of the questions or many of them. When you're creating your notes, I would organize them by the question, the answer. You may find as you're writing and thinking about things that you've got enough material to talk for 4 to 5 minutes on one question. Or you may find it a lot easier to spend a minute or two on each single question and then just answer all of them. When you take the time to make the notes, you're going to have a much better sense of how much you have to say about each question. Like some of these might be very, very important to you. Maybe you are very passionate about filmmaking. Maybe you've done some filmmaking yourself, just on a kind of amateur scale, and you have really strong thoughts about that, in which case you may have lots to say. Or you may not really have ever thought about it, in which case it might be a little bit harder to think of what you want to say. Now, there are all sorts of videos out there about public speaking and creating a vlog or a video journal. I used a bunch of different search terms. I used things like making a vlog or feeling comfortable on camera or how to speak naturally on a video. Those are what I put into YouTube to kind of pull things up. Again, I would love to watch one with you, but YouTube's not letting us do that anymore. I've got a little sample page here. I have not had a chance, hang on a second, to preview these videos, but just to kind of show you what I mean, I've got how to speak naturally on camera and a bunch of different videos come up. Some of them are a little bit longer, like 8 minutes. Some of them are a little bit shorter. And they just kind of are people giving you some ideas on how to feel more comfortable sounding natural and talking onto a camera. Now, I have not had a chance, obviously, to screen all of these. So you will have to kind of decide for yourself whether they are appropriate or inappropriate, or whether they're useful or not useful for you, okay? Hang on a sec. Okay, there is also an article on some tips on how to speak well on camera. I am going to go take a look at that if it'll let me. Hang on. Sometimes. Sorry, I put little links on these, but sometimes they don't want to work properly. I don't know why. Okay, hang on a sec. I'm running out of time, but we will take a quick look at this just so you kind of see it. Okay. Now, I do want to point out, teleprompter is an apt that kind of, it acts as a teleprompter, right? You can write things out and then you can look at it and read it. I am not in any way suggesting that you do so. I am just saying that I think their article on how to speak in front of a camera was kind of helpful, okay? So one is they talk about maintaining eye contact. You're not really talking to the camera, you're talking to the person watching your video. And just like in an in-person conversation, you like people to make eye contact, you would also normally do that when you're looking at the camera, okay? You want to look directly into the lens of the camera. This is important because, so I'm looking at a great big square computer screen, and I tend to want to look right in the middle of the computer screen. But most computers actually have their camera way up top. So I would actually kind of need to focus a little bit higher than I normally do. If I keep looking in the middle where I'm mentally thinking of things, I'm actually going to be not looking at the person watching stuff. So that will feel a little bit odd. What I would do is take a few like little mini, 5-10 seconds where you're talking and then take a look at it and see how natural it looks and kind of play around with it a little bit before you get to doing the whole thing. Don't forget about your body language. Even if you're doing a relatively a close-up that maybe only includes your shoulders, you do still want to use body language. You make gestures, your head moves a little bit. You can study this. I'm just saying you don't want to stand there kind of stiff as a board, afraid to move, because it will look really unnatural. You also want to make sure you practice, right? You can practice before you go on camera. You can practice in front of your mirror. You can practice in front of a friend. If you do it once and you don't like it, you can just redo it over and over again. I don't need to know that you spent, 10 tries. It doesn't matter to me, right? Very few people ad-lib their content, okay? It's way easier to write things down. And then if you have some ideas, you can always go off your script, but it will help to have written things down ahead of time. Here, be yourself. I don't feel like that's really a problem. Just basically don't feel like you've got to imitate any certain person to sound good. Who you are is just fine. Now, this part I'm not worried about. Don't worry about the teleprompter. That's just them trying to sell their product, okay? But those are some examples of ways you can do stuff. All right. Sorry, we're nearing the end here. Oh, I think I might actually be almost there. Okay, so for example, let's say I was starting to write down some ideas. I would take a look at the prompt. I might put that at the top of my page. Lisa Jackson says Indigenous films need to be made by Indigenous people. Why does she say this? Do you agree with her? Why or why not? So then I'm going to take the first question. Why does she say this? What are her reasons? Now, she probably talks about that in that film we're supposed to watch. So I would watch that, write down some other reasons she says that, so that I've got something to say. Then I would think about, do I agree with her? Yes, no, maybe, sometimes. And then what are some examples? Are there some movies done by Indigenous people that are really amazing that I'm like, oh, see, that happened because that person was Indigenous? Sorry, a little bit of cough here. Or on the other hand, examples of films done by non-Indigenous people that really had some problematic aspects. Dances with Wolves is one very famous example. There are lots out there. So that's the kind of thing where you don't want to just say, yeah, because, and then be non-specific. Try to give very specific examples. Like for this, give some examples of Indigenous films that are really amazing and why, what do they capture that's not being captured by non-Indigenous people? Or maybe you disagree. Maybe you feel like there's some really great films done by non-Indigenous people that do capture the Indigenous experience effectively, in which case you would talk about that too. So for each of the questions are a little bit different. Like I said, I don't necessarily have to go, her reasons are, and then write out a whole sentence. I would say this depends a little bit on how nervous you get. If you love to talk and you're super comfortable talking, you may not need to write out every single word. If you are a little bit shyer or if you're feeling a little bit more nervous, you may find it really comforting to write everything. The problem with writing everything out is you don't want to be in a spot where you sound like you're reading and where your eyes are down looking at your notes. So like right now, my notes are at the bottom half of my computer screen. And if I were to just read them, I would not be looking at the camera and it would look really weird. And if I read slowly, it would sound really stiff and unnatural. So you want to try and avoid that. So my sound tech is going, Jill, time to wrap things up. So I have to finish for today. I will be back tomorrow. If you have any questions about this, feel free to reach out to me and contact me, and I'd be happy to help you with it. Take care. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Bye-bye.